This is my true story. I worked my whole life for one purpose: to build a home where my only son would never struggle the way I did. I spent 45 years breaking my back in a factory, saving every coin, paying for his school, his car, and the very roof over his head. When his mother passed, I thought I still had him, my blood, my reason to keep going. But I was wrong. One night, my son pointed at the garage and told me, "Sleep there, you stinky old man." I didn't argue. I obeyed. But what I did next made him beg at my door. Before I tell you how, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe so more people hear my story. I gave my life to work. 45 years of it. My hands became leather from the machines, my lungs black from the factory air. Every sunrise, I walked through those gates, no matter how tired or sick I was. I told myself it was for him, for my son. Every drop of sweat, every overtime shift, every ache in my bones had a purpose. I wanted to give him what I never had: an easy start, a home with lights that never went out, a full plate every night. When I got my paycheck, I didn't buy new clothes or shoes. I bought his books, his food, his future. When he was little, he used to wait for me by the window. Every time I came home, he'd run into my arms shouting, "Dad's home!" That sound was my reason to keep going. When his mother got sick, I stayed by her side through every hospital visit. He was still in school then, too young to understand what it means to watch someone you love fade. I remember her last words to me. She said, "Promise me you'll look after him." "He's all we have," I promised. I didn't just say it, I meant it. I built my life around that promise. When she passed, I didn't cry in front of him. I stayed strong, even though I wanted to collapse. I cooked, I cleaned, I kept the house running. I told him, "Don't worry, son. You just focus on your studies." I was father and mother both, doing what love demanded, quietly, without complaint. When he finished college, I thought the hardest years were behind us. I watched him put on his first office shirt, proud as if I had built the whole world just for that day. When he got married, I felt like I had done my duty as a man. I gave him the keys to the house, not because I wanted to leave, but because I wanted him to feel like it was his. "You're the man now," I told him. He smiled and hugged me. Back then, his hug still meant something. I thought, when my body grew old and my hands could no longer lift, he'd be there for me. I thought when my back started hurting and the nights got colder, he'd make sure I didn't feel alone. But slowly, I began to realize something. The more I gave, the less he remembered where it came from. The house, the comfort, the roof he bragged about to his friends. All of it stood on my years of work. Yet the older I got, the smaller I became in his eyes. I was no longer the father who built. I was the old man who stayed. Still, I didn't stop loving him. I told myself that maybe he was just stressed, that maybe marriage had changed things, that young people were different now. I kept cooking small meals, fixing broken lights, trimming the grass in the front yard. I wanted to stay useful, because in a world that only values youth, old men like me survive by being helpful. I believed love would come back if I stayed quiet long enough. But love doesn't return to where respect has died. There were small signs I ignored. The sighs when I spoke too long, the way his wife rolled her eyes when I asked for help carrying groceries. Once, I heard her whisper, "He should move out soon." My son didn't respond. He just stayed quiet. That silence told me everything. I was becoming an unwanted guest in the house I had built. Still, I told myself to be patient. He was my son. He'd never truly hurt me. I was wrong. Every nail in that roof, every wall in that home, was built with my sweat, my youth, my life. Yet one day, that same roof became my prison. The comfort I had created turned into my punishment. I didn't know it then, but soon the man I had raised would make me wish I had left with my wife the day she closed her eyes for the last time. It didn't happen all at once. Disrespect never does. It starts small, like a slow leak in a roof you think you can ignore. One day, he stopped calling me Dad. He just said, "Hey," like I was a neighbor he barely knew. I laughed it off the first time. Told myself maybe that's how young people talk now. But soon, the hey turned into silence. I would greet him when he came home, and he'd just walk past me, scrolling through his phone, not even looking up. At the dinner table, I'd ask him how work was. He'd shrug. His wife would smirk. Then they'd start whispering to each other like I wasn't even there. I noticed small things disappearing: respect, warmth, patience. When I coughed, he rolled his eyes. When I asked for help with the TV remote, he said, "You'll never learn." His wife laughed. That laugh stuck with me. It wasn't loud, but it carried cruelty. I used to hear laughter in this house as music. Now it sounded like mockery. She began taking over everything: the kitchen, the bills, even the way the furniture was arranged. One day, my old armchair, the one I used to sit in every evening, was gone. I asked where it was, and she said, "It made the room look small." I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, it felt like she had taken more than furniture. She had taken my place. Dinner time changed, too. We used to eat together: one table, one meal, one family. Now they ate first. By the time I came downstairs, they'd leave a cold plate by the sink. I'd sit alone, eating food that had already lost its warmth, listening to them laugh in the other room. They talked about vacations, cars, and parties I wasn't invited to. I didn't say a word. I just ate quietly, telling myself that peace was more valuable than pride. Then came the looks. Those glances between them whenever I entered the room. I'd walk in, and conversation would stop. I wasn't stupid. I knew what that meant. I was no longer part of their world. I was an inconvenience that lived too long. Sometimes, when his friends came over, I'd hear him joke, "He's just old now. Doesn't do much, sleeps most of the time." They'd laugh. I'd sit in my room pretending not to hear. A father learns how to hide pain when there's no one left to care. One night, while I was watching TV, I started coughing hard. My lungs burned. I heard his wife say from the kitchen, "You should tell him to go to a home or something." My son didn't reply right away. Then he said, "He's fine. He just likes attention." That sentence broke something inside me. I wasn't coughing for attention. I was coughing because my body was tired, because years of factory dust had settled inside me like cement. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to be a burden. I started keeping to my room, avoiding their eyes, avoiding their laughter. I began to eat less, speak less, move less. When you live in a house where your presence feels like noise, silence becomes your only defense. His wife began leaving my laundry outside my door. She said she didn't like old smell mixing with theirs. Once, when I forgot to close the bathroom door, she shouted, "Can you be more careful?" My son said nothing. He just looked away. That hurt more than any words could. His silence was approval. Day by day, I disappeared inside my own home. My name wasn't spoken, my seat was gone, my voice ignored. I walked softly so the floorboards wouldn't creak. I opened doors quietly so they wouldn't sigh. That's what it means to become unwanted. You learn to shrink, to fold yourself into corners, to breathe quietly so no one remembers you exist. But there's something cruel about silence. The more you practice it, the sharper your memory becomes. And I remembered everything, every favor, every coin, every sacrifice that built this roof. I never said a word, but inside me, a storm was forming. I didn't know when it would come, but I knew one day the same silence they gave me would return to them, only colder. It got worse with time. Disrespect slowly became humiliation, and humiliation became routine. It was no longer about words. It was about how they looked at me, how they moved around me like I was some broken object collecting dust in their home. One evening, I went to the living room to sit down and watch the evening news, something I'd done every day for decades. His wife was sitting there scrolling through her phone. I said softly, "Mind if I join?" She didn't look up. She just said, "Don't sit there. It smells like old man." My son laughed. She laughed too. I forced a smile, even though my throat tightened. I pretended it didn't matter. But that laughter stayed echoing in my head for hours after they went upstairs. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. The same hands that once built that living room wall, that painted it twice, that paid for every single thing they were proud of. Those hands had built their comfort, yet now they were seen as something dirty. I looked at my shoes by the door, worn out, cracked at the sides. They used to walk me through storms just to earn the money that paid for their happiness. Now, they were just old shoes in the way. I realized something that night. People forget the hands that fed them once they start eating from silver plates. A few days later, I overheard my son talking to his friend on the phone. He said, "He just sits around all day. Doesn't even help. He's lazy." That word hit harder than any slap. I wanted to walk in there and remind him who built the life he now called his own. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the wall, feeling my chest ache, not from age, but from heartbreak. You can survive being tired. You can survive being old. But being unwanted, that's a death that happens while you're still breathing. Soon, I stopped entering the living room altogether. The air there was too heavy with judgment. I stayed mostly in my room, quiet, reading old newspapers or just sitting with my thoughts. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing downstairs, ordering food, talking about trips. They never called me to join. Once, I heard his wife say, "He's like a ghost in this house." She was right. I was. But she forgot ghosts only haunt where they've been wronged. Meals became colder. They stopped leaving plates for me altogether. I'd go to the kitchen after they were done, scraping whatever leftovers I could find. Some nights, I'd just drink water and sleep early. I didn't want pity. I just wanted peace. But peace doesn't live in places built on pride. One Sunday, he had friends over. I stayed in my room so I wouldn't embarrass him. But I heard them laughing about something, then my name came up. One of his friends asked, "Your dad still lives with you?" He replied, "Yeah, he's just old now. Doesn't really do much." They laughed. I felt my face burn. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. A father's tears are private. They fall in silence and dry before anyone sees them. That night, I lay in bed thinking about all the times I'd carried him when he was sick, how I stayed up through nights to keep him safe. And now, when I coughed, he told me to keep it down. I used to think time made bonds stronger, but I learned it only exposes what's real. Respect isn't something you can beg for. It's something that either exists or never did. From that day forward, I stopped expecting kindness. I stopped expecting love. I stopped expecting anything. But I didn't stop thinking. Because behind my silence, behind my soft "okay" and my tired smile, something was changing. I was beginning to see the truth clearly. He thought I was weak because I stayed quiet, but silence is not weakness. Silence is patience sharpening its edge. He had taken away my dignity, my place, my peace. Everything a man needs to feel human. But he forgot one thing. The house was still mine. And that meant so was the ending. That night, the air felt heavy. The kind of heavy that tells you something is about to break. Not a chair, not a wall, but a man. I had been coughing badly for days. The doctor said it was old age, dust, maybe the cold creeping into my bones. I didn't complain. I didn't want to trouble them. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the edge of the bed, trying not to make noise. Around midnight, the cough came again, deep and painful. I tried to cover my mouth with the blanket to muffle it, but it still echoed through the hallway. Upstairs, I heard his footsteps, heavy, angry. Then the door opened. He stood there, his face red, hair messy, eyes full of irritation. "Can you keep it down? We're trying to sleep," he shouted. I opened my mouth to apologize, but no words came out. My throat was too dry. I just nodded and lowered my head. He turned and slammed the door. That slam said more than any words could. I sat there for a long time after that, listening to the quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like punishment. In the morning, I made tea like I always did. It was my habit. 2 cups, one for me, one left by the stove just in case he wanted some. He came down, looked at the cup, and pushed it aside. "You need your own space," he said. I didn't understand at first. I thought he meant maybe I should move to another room, maybe to make them comfortable. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He just pointed toward the back door, the one that led to the garage. "There," he said. "You can sleep there. It'll be quieter." For a second, I thought he was joking. I even smiled faintly, waiting for him to laugh, to say he was just kidding. But his face stayed cold. His wife stood behind him, arms folded, smirking like she'd been waiting for this moment. "It's for the best," she said. "You'll have your own space." I looked at her, then at him, and something inside me cracked quietly. Not anger, not shock, just the sound of something dying. Maybe love. He went to the garage, opened it, and threw in an old blanket, a pillow, and a small lamp. "You'll be fine here," he said flatly. "It's dry. You've got light dry." Light. As if that's what a father needs from his son after giving him everything. I didn't say anything. I just nodded again, because that's what you do when your heart has already given up fighting. That night, I lay on the cold floor. The smell of oil, metal, and dust filled the air. The concrete pressed against my back. The thin blanket did nothing to stop the cold from crawling into my bones. Through the small window, I could see the glow from the house, the light from the kitchen where I used to sit, where laughter once lived. Now, it was just a reminder of the world I'd been thrown out of. I could hear them laughing upstairs, watching TV, warm and fed. I pulled the blanket tighter, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks. Every sound in that garage felt louder. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the pipes, the beating of my own heart. I thought about my wife that night, how she used to tell me, "He'll take care of you when I'm gone." I wanted to believe she was right. I wanted to believe I hadn't raised a stranger. But faith is a fragile thing. Once it breaks, no prayer can fix it. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of anything. Not of her, not of him, not of home. Just silence. The kind that comes before something ends. When the sun rose the next morning, I made a promise to myself. I would never beg to be treated like a human being in a house I built. He wanted me in the garage like a dog. Fine. But dogs don't build roofs. Dogs don't own deeds. And he had forgotten who still held that paper. He thought he had given me a place to sleep. What he really gave me was a reason to rise. The first night in the garage taught me more about people than 70 years of living ever did. The cold didn't hurt as much as the realization that I wasn't unwanted by the world, only by my own blood. The air smelled of oil and dust, mixed with the faint bitterness of betrayal. I lay there on the thin blanket he threw at me, listening to the wind crawl through the cracks in the wall. Every gust of air stung like a reminder of what I'd become. A father turned into a burden. A man turned into a nuisance. A soul turned into silence. At first, I couldn't sleep. My chest hurt with every breath. I kept staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how it all came to this. I had built this place. Every wall, every corner, the shelves, the wiring, even the light switch he used every day, all done by my hands. And now, those same hands were shaking under a blanket that couldn't even cover my knees. I turned on the small lamp beside me. The light flickered weakly, casting shadows across the floor. That dim light was the only thing that kept the darkness from swallowing me whole. Above me, I could hear the muffled sound of their TV, laughter, music, the sound of dishes clinking. They were eating dinner, warm, loud, alive. I had raised my son to believe that family meant sitting together at one table. Now I realized he had rewritten that rule. Family meant whoever was convenient. I wasn't part of that version anymore. I was just a story they didn't want to hear. Around midnight, the laughter faded and the house went quiet. I could hear footsteps upstairs, then the faint creak of the bed frame. Sleep found them easily. It didn't even visit me. I stayed awake, thinking about the years that had led to this. Every coin I saved, every meal I skipped, every wish I buried just to see him happy. I remembered the winter when he was 10, sick with fever. I stayed up all night, sitting beside him, changing wet towels on his forehead. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I prayed, I cried, I begged God not to take him. And now, that same boy had told me to sleep in the garage. Sometimes life doesn't punish you with pain. It punishes you with memory. Every act of love comes back to you like a knife when it's repaid with cruelty. In the corner of the garage, I saw an old wooden box. Inside were tools I hadn't touched in years: hammers, nails, screws, and a folder wrapped in plastic. I pulled it out. It was damp, but still intact. I opened it and saw the house papers, my name written clearly, still the owner. I ran my fingers over the ink. My heart slowed down. The world outside could laugh, but the law still spoke my name. That small realization brought a kind of warmth the blanket never could. I leaned back against the wall and smiled for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a man wears when he remembers he's not powerless. They had taken my dignity, but not my ownership. They had taken my place at the table, but not my name from the deed. The power they thought they had was borrowed, and borrowed power always runs out. When morning came, the first sunlight slipped through the cracks and touched my face. It wasn't gentle. It was sharp, like a wake-up call. My son came out to the driveway, coffee in hand, and saw me sitting there. He didn't speak, just nodded and went to work, locking the door behind him. That's when it hit me. He trusted me so little as a father, yet so much as a fool. He never imagined I could change anything. But he forgot something simple. Old age doesn't kill wisdom. It concentrates it. That morning, I made my decision. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't seek pity. I would let the law, the one thing he couldn't manipulate, speak for me. He had given me a bed of cold concrete. I would give him a lifetime of regret. He called me a dog that night. He forgot dogs don't forget who kicks them. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. My bones ached, and my back felt like a slab of cold iron. I sat there for a while, listening to the sound of birds waking up. They had nests, warmth, belonging. I had a garage. I walked out quietly and opened the side door just to breathe fresh air. That's when I saw the mailman stop by. He waved like he always did, but his eyes shifted. They didn't look at me the same. His smile was small, polite, uncomfortable. Then I realized what he was seeing: an old man stepping out of a garage with a blanket in his arms. He didn't have to say anything. Pity has its own language. I wanted to disappear, but you can't hide shame once it's been seen. Later that day, I heard whispers outside the fence. His wife was talking to the neighbor. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. He sleeps there now. He's more comfortable. That word stabbed deep. I stood behind the door, listening as they giggled. Each laugh was another cut. I wondered what they told people about me. That I chose to sleep there? That I liked the smell of gasoline? Lies travel faster than truth when spoken by those with pride to protect. By noon, I saw 2 neighbors walk past, looking at the garage, pretending not to stare. I heard one whisper, "Poor old man." I wanted to shout that I wasn't poor, that I built everything they saw, that the grass under their feet grew because of my hands. But I stayed quiet. Silence was the only dignity I had left. That evening, when I went out to throw some trash away, a group of kids from the street pointed and laughed. "Look, the old man lives in the garage," they shouted. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. Their laughter faded, but its echo followed me all night. Inside, I could hear my son and his wife watching TV again. Laughter, as always. I wondered if they heard what people were saying, if they even cared. Probably not. Shame doesn't touch those who have none. I sat there, my head resting on my knees, and realized that humiliation is a strange kind of fire. It burns quietly, but once it starts, it never goes out. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I helped water the plants, fixed the fence hinge, even cleaned the driveway. Old habits die slow. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see effort and feel guilt. But when my son came out, he didn't say thank you. He said, "Don't touch the car." That was it. 3 words. Cold, flat, dismissive. I looked at him, and for a second, I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who once held my hand when crossing the street. But that boy was gone. The man in front of me had forgotten who built the road beneath his feet. That evening, as I was sitting outside, one of my old co-workers passed by. He stopped and said, "John, you okay? You living here now?" I couldn't answer. My throat tightened. I just nodded slowly, and he shook his head, muttering something under his breath before walking away. That was the moment the last thread of pride inside me snapped. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a spectacle. A story for others to whisper about at dinner. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't even close my eyes. Every sound outside, the wind, the creak of the door, the bark of a dog, reminded me where I was. I was the man who used to own the house, now living beside it like a forgotten piece of furniture. And yet, as the night grew colder, something in me started to change. Shame began to cool into something else. Focus. Humiliation, when endured in silence, becomes a weapon. Each cruel laugh, each whisper, each look of pity, I stored them all. Not to cry over, but to remember. Because I knew the world always laughs until it loses something. And my son was about to lose everything he thought he owned. I didn't plan it out of hate. Hate is loud, messy, and foolish. I planned it out of truth. He wanted me to live like a dog. But even dogs remember who feeds them and who kicks them. He had turned me into a story of pity. I would turn him into a story of warning. That night, while the house slept, I sat in the dark garage with only the weak lamp glowing beside me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something else. Awareness. I realized I had lived too long in their world of disrespect, too long waiting for love that was never coming back. That was the moment I decided to stop surviving and start remembering who I was. I wasn't a beggar living in someone else's house. I was the man who built it. Every wall, every brick, every screw. My blood was in its foundation. I wasn't a guest here. I was the owner. I stood up and walked toward the side door that led to the kitchen. The house was silent. Even their silence felt arrogant. On the small table near the wall, there was an old wooden drawer I hadn't opened in years. I built that drawer myself decades ago. Inside it, I used to keep small things: bills, letters, photos, keys. My hands hesitated for a moment, then pulled it open. The wood creaked softly, like an old friend waking up. Beneath some faded envelopes and broken pens, there it was. A thick, yellowed envelope with my handwriting on it. My heart beat slower as I lifted it. The edges were worn, but the ink was still clear. Property deed, John W. Surname faded with time. My name, my handwriting, my signature, not his, mine. I opened it carefully and ran my fingers over the old paper. The seal was unbroken, the stamp still valid. I turned to the last page, and there it was again, my name listed as the sole owner of the property. For years, I had forgotten that I never legally transferred it to him. I had meant to, once he proved himself responsible enough to handle it. But he never did. I had only told him, "It's yours now." I never changed the papers. Words can lie, signatures don't. In that moment, something inside me changed. I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a man holding a loaded weapon. Not a gun, but something far more powerful. The law. All the humiliation, all the laughter, all the nights spent freezing in that garage. They suddenly turned quiet. I realized I didn't need to yell or fight. I didn't even need to raise my voice. All I needed to do was sign my name one last time. I placed the deed back into the envelope and tucked it under my coat. For the first time in months, I stood tall. My knees cracked, my back hurt, but I stood straight anyway. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly through the dark with its head held high. Before going back to the garage, I glanced around the kitchen. Everything they used, the chairs, the stove, the tiles, I had paid for. Every comfort they enjoyed came from the man they had turned into a servant. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they never checked the one drawer that still held their future. That was their mistake. As I walked back into the garage, the air felt different, still cold, but lighter. My breathing slowed, steady, calm. I sat on the cot and held the envelope close. In that moment, I wasn't an old man anymore. I was the man who remembered. I smiled, not out of revenge, but out of peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know the truth, and the world doesn't. I thought about how he'd wake up the next morning, shouting orders, thinking I was still the same broken father he left in the garage. He'd have no idea that his world was already over, and he wouldn't even hear it fall until the papers were signed. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling, the envelope resting on my chest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. He had given me the garage, but I still held the foundation. And the man who owns the foundation owns everything. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, the deed still clutched in my hand like a final heartbeat from a life that had been forgotten. I didn't waste a second. I washed my face, changed into the only decent shirt I had left, and walked out before anyone upstairs stirred. The air was sharp, the road quiet, and for the first time in months, my steps felt steady. I wasn't walking to escape. I was walking to reclaim. By 8 a.m., I was standing in front of a small law office downtown, the same place I'd used years ago to sign the first purchase papers for that house. The clerk looked at me and blinked, surprised. "Mr. John?" she asked softly. "It's been years." I nodded. "I need to make some changes," I said. My voice was calm, no anger, just purpose. She led me to my old lawyer, a man who had gone gray like me. He looked at the deed, then looked back up with raised eyebrows. "You still own it?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "and I'm ready to sell it." He leaned forward, confused. "Does your son know?" I shook my head slowly. "He doesn't need to. He thinks it's already his. But I built that house with my hands, and now I'm taking it back with my name." The lawyer studied me for a long time, then nodded. "We can do it quietly," he said. "It'll take a few hours." That's all I needed to hear. I signed where he pointed, page after page, my old signature carving the end of their comfort. Every line of ink was a memory. One stroke for the nights I went hungry, another for the laughter they took from me. By noon, it was done. The deal was clean, legal, and irreversible. The house was no longer theirs. I didn't feel joy or triumph. I felt stillness, the kind that comes when the noise of humiliation finally fades. My lawyer handed me a folder with the sale confirmation and transfer receipts. "Where will you go?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Somewhere quiet," I said, "where I can sleep without the sound of laughter above me." I left his office and walked straight to the bank. The money from the sale was already wired into my account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for a small home, enough to live with dignity, enough to remind me that I wasn't helpless. I withdrew a little cash and folded it into my pocket. My fingers didn't shake this time. They were steady, like they were holding justice. When I got back to the house, his car was gone. Perfect. The timing couldn't have been better. I stepped into the living room, looking around slowly. My eyes moved from the walls I painted to the couch I fixed, to the floor I polished. Everything had my touch on it, and soon none of it would be his. I left quietly, locking the front door behind me. The keys jingled in my hand. I ran my thumb across the metal, smooth, cold, final. I could almost hear my wife's voice saying, "He'll understand one day." Maybe she was right, but understanding always comes too late for the proud. That evening, I checked into a small motel on the other side of town. Simple bed, thin sheets, no luxury, but peace. Real peace. I sat by the window, watching cars pass by. Each one reminded me of how fast life can move when you stop standing still for people who don't deserve you. When night fell, I smiled quietly. Tomorrow, he would return to find his kingdom gone, his locks changed, his name erased. And there would be no shouting match, no revenge speech, no confrontation. Only silence. The same silence he gave me. He made me sleep like a dog. I sold his home like a man. The papers were signed, the keys were mine, and by morning, he'd be the one locked out, not me. That day began like any other for him, arrogant, loud, and full of false pride. He left early for work, whistling, locking the door behind him as if he truly owned it. I watched from across the street, standing behind a parked truck, my hands deep in my coat pockets. The morning sun hit the windows of my house, not his. I waited until his car disappeared down the road before walking back toward the gate. There was a moving truck already parked in the driveway, just as the new owners had arranged. They smiled politely when they saw me. "You must be Mr. John," one of them said. I nodded. "Yes, the house is yours now." They began unloading boxes, furniture, and small decorations. Every sound, every scrape of a chair, every thud of a box, felt like the sound of justice being unpacked. I watched from the sidewalk, not as a victim this time, but as the rightful man restoring balance. By noon, their laughter filled the air. Their children ran across the lawn. It felt strange, seeing joy return to that place. But this time, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't built on someone else's pain. It was clean, honest. Around 5 p.m., his car turned into the street. I saw it before he did. I didn't move. He parked in the same spot as always, stepped out with his jacket slung over his shoulder, humming a tune. But when he looked up, he froze. Strangers were standing in his doorway. Furniture he didn't recognize filled the porch. The curtains were different. His keychain slipped from his hand and hit the pavement. I watched as confusion twisted across his face. He hurried to the front door, tried his keys. They didn't fit. He knocked once, then again, harder. The new owner opened the door, polite but firm. "Can I help you?" he asked. My son stammered, his voice breaking. "This is my house." "What are you doing here?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. We just bought this property this morning. You might be mistaken." He handed him a copy of the title. My name was right there, clear as sunlight. Sold by John W. He looked at the paper like it was poison. His voice grew desperate. "No. There must be a mistake. This is my father's house." The man replied calmly. "Yes, it was." Then he closed the door. My son stood there for a few seconds, motionless. Then he began to pound on the door, shouting my name. "Dad! Dad! What did you do?" His voice cracked between anger and fear. He turned, scanning the street, and that's when his eyes found me, standing by the gate, calm, still, holding the keys. His face went pale. "Dad, please," he said, stepping closer. "What did you do?" I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I tossed the keys lightly in my hand, a small jingle, the sound of power switching sides. His voice grew smaller with every word. "Please, tell me this isn't real." I looked him in the eyes and said quietly, "It's real." He dropped to his knees right there on the driveway, hands shaking. The same driveway where I used to teach him how to ride his first bicycle. The same concrete that once held laughter now held his shame. Neighbors began to peek from their windows, whispering just like they had whispered about me. But this time, it wasn't pity in their eyes. It was justice. He begged to come inside, begged for a second chance. His wife stood by the car, silent, tears in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. I didn't care to know. Every word he said fell flat against the cold air. "I'll fix it, Dad. I'll do better. Please don't do this." But he already had done it. Every insult, every night I spent freezing, every cruel laugh. He had written this ending himself. I walked up to him slowly, the same calm steps I took the night I first walked into that house decades ago. I looked down at him, still kneeling. "You told me I didn't belong inside," I said. "Now it's your turn." Then I turned and walked away, the sound of the keys jingling in my pocket. Behind me, his voice broke into sobs, echoing through the neighborhood. But I didn't look back. Some doors are meant to stay closed. He had taken my home and turned it into a prison. I took it back and turned it into his lesson. A week passed before he found me again. I had moved into a small, quiet house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a place with a chair that was mine, a bed that was mine, and peace that no one could take. Every morning, I woke up to sunlight instead of orders. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the world go by without anyone shouting my name like I was a burden. It was strange at first, the silence, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I knew the rhythm of that knock. I had heard it once before, when he was small and scared of thunder. I opened the door, and there he was, my son. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair messy, his eyes red and swollen. He didn't look proud anymore. He looked human. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy I raised. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, his hands trembling, clutching a small bag. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I have nowhere to go." His words hung heavy in the air, the same air that once carried his laughter. I looked at him, this man who had once told me to sleep in the garage, who had taken my dignity and treated it like dirt, now standing at my door, begging for a place to rest. I should have felt pity. I should have felt something soft, something like forgiveness. But I didn't. I felt the memory of cold nights, of coughing in silence, of laughter echoing above my head while I froze alone. I remembered the smell of oil, the sound of my own breath against concrete. Those memories had weight, and they didn't lift easily. He dropped to his knees right there on my doorstep. His voice cracked as he said, "Please, Dad, I made a mistake. I'll do anything, just let me in." I could see tears streaming down his face, falling onto the same kind of ground he once made me sleep on. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just stood there, letting the silence speak for me. Then I stepped aside, pointed toward the side of the house where my small garage stood, and said quietly, "There's room in the garage." His face froze. For a second, he thought I was joking. But when he saw I wasn't, his lips trembled. "Dad, please don't," he whispered. I didn't reply. I just looked at him the same way he looked at me that night. Tired, cold, done. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking shut like a full stop at the end of a story that had taken too long to end. I leaned against the door for a moment, breathing out the years I had carried. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. He had taught me what it meant to be unwanted. I simply returned the lesson. Later that night, I looked out the window. He was gone. Maybe he went to a friend, maybe he didn't. I didn't ask. I didn't wonder. Some stories don't need new chapters. They need closure. I sat down with a cup of tea, the same kind I used to make for both of us, and whispered softly, "You made me sleep like a dog. Now you know how it feels to be left outside." It wasn't anger anymore. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes after you've been broken and decided not to rebuild for anyone else. I wasn't the same man who once bowed to his own son. I was the man who had remembered his worth. He took my bed, my dignity, and my home. So I took back the roof, the keys, and the silence. That night, as I turned off the light and lay in bed, I smiled. Not out of joy, but out of finality. Some lessons are cruel, but they are fair. He made me sleep in the garage like a dog. Now he sleeps under the sky, like a man who finally learned what he became.